You know, in 1979, I filled my application to Stanford, and at the end, at the bottom, I stated that I had been through a very difficult situation, that I'd been lost in the Andes for 72 days, and that I had survived that ordeal. But I never knew what happened with that. Nobody ever told me anything about that, and I always wonder if that had any influence or not in the fact that I was accepted at Stanford. And in a way, just that was like a debt that I had, and I wanted to come here and say, okay, I put it in my application form, and now I want to return to the Stanford community the fact that I used it some time ago. But before getting into some details, let me show you a small video that was made with the real moment when we were rescued.
Larga noche de sufrimiento ha quedado atrás. 3 helicópteros del Servicio de Búsqueda y Salvamento de la Fuerza Aérea de Chile se encontraban operando en la zona de los Maitenes, sector cordillerano de la provincia de Colchagua. Su objetivo, rescatar a los 8 sobrevivientes que aún permanecían en el lugar. Vistos desde el cielo, los restos del aparato uruguayo presentan una visión desoladora y terrible. Parece increíble que 16 personas pudieran vivir y convivir en tan inhóspito ambiente, y más increíble aún, la forma en que 2 de los muchachos pudieron escapar de esa verdadera prisión de hielo enclavada en el corazón de los Andes. Helicópteros de la Fuerza Aérea que desafiaron peligrosas turbulencias lograron llegar hasta San Fernando con los 8 resucitados. Después, los primeros bocados de alimento en muchos días, los primeros exámenes médicos, las primeras palabras tranquilas. Los rescatados que actualmente reciben atención médica en San Fernando y que próximamente serán trasladados a Santiago son Roberto Canesa Hurta, Fernando Parrado Nodelbay, Pedro Algorta, Álvaro Mañino, Daniel Fernández.
Pedro Algorta, 21 años, estudiante de Ciencias Económicas. También venía en el avión accidentado.
De los primeros días fue un caos. Yo los primeros días quedé completamente inconsciente y después poco a poco me fui recuperando gracias a mis compañeros que me iban ayudando, y al final soy de los que estoy mejor físicamente y al final era yo de los que ayudaba a los compañeros.
Los facultativos, asombrados por la vitalidad de los sobrevivientes, no han encontrado una explicación lógica al increíble suceso que conmovió a Latinoamérica. Las explicaciones de por qué y cómo lograron sobrevivir hay que buscarla en un campo distinto de la medicina y de lo científico.
Lo que logramos nosotros no tiene ningún corte diferente, solamente un poco la fe en Dios y la fe en la vida.
Bueno, considerando de que los aviones no nos veían, dijimos la única posibilidad es salir por nosotros mismos, entonces decidimos que los más fuertes salieran a una expedición a ver dónde estaban.
Además, para nosotros esto no es un milagro, no es que Dios nos haya salvado así con paracaídas, sino que nosotros sabíamos que nos íbamos a salvar, nos organizamos para salvarnos, y Dios nos dio fuerzas y nos salvamos.
El grupo, que se mantuvo con vida durante largo lapso, alimentándose con chocolates, queso y líquenes, perdieron un promedio de 15 kilos.
Nosotros nos cedían los alimentos para que estuviéramos fuertes a los que hacíamos las excursiones, y fue realmente apasionada muerte. Los demás comían poquísimo, no había tanta comida.
Parece imposible comprender cómo todo ese grupo de alegres deportistas de rugby pudo sobrevivir a casi 4.000 metros de altura en las nieves eternas, más de 70 días, sin alimentos, sin ropas, y además rodeados por decenas de camaradas muertos.
Indignación y molestia provocaron en los medios de gobierno las informaciones sensacionalistas y truculentas de órganos de prensa extranjeros y nacionales que se han dedicado a explotar el caso de los sobrevivientes del avión uruguayo.
Respecto a algunos enfoques un poco sensacionalistas de nuestra prensa, ¿tu opinión?
Creo que la prensa de todo el mundo, en la prensa de todo el mundo hay prensa buena y prensa mala, ¿no? La comprensión de un problema problema que puede no ser entendido, pero este pueblo chileno que tan cristianamente se ha portado con nosotros, es lógico que lo entienda, como lo ha entendido.
En el frío se quedan 29 amigos, 29 familiares, hombres y mujeres, que cayeron en la dura batalla contra la violenta naturaleza nuestra.
Bueno, hubo muchos pedidos, porque al principio éramos 27, después hubo una luz y quedamos menos, después murieron algunos compañeros, ¿no? Y dentro de eso había altibajos, ¿no? Hacíamos excursiones, hicimos varias excursiones para buscarnos y a veces salía yo, otras veces salía otro, ¿no? Hacíamos mochilas, hacíamos ropa, hacíamos frazadas, arreglábamos el avión. Yo creo que después del aluvión recién salí para adelante.
Well, the nice part of the story for me is that 35 years later I come here and speak about it and basically say the same things that I was saying 35 years ago. Well, you know that I was born in Uruguay 56 years ago, and I had lived in Chile before my accident for about 3 years. But in 1972, the rugby team of my high school in Uruguay had organized a rugby match to be played in Chile. And they offered us rather cheap tickets to go and fly to Chile. I had one special reason to go to Chile, is that when I lived there, I had left a girlfriend in Chile, which I wanted to see and visit in my trip. But on October 13th of 1972, I boarded that plane with many of my classmates, and we just took our flight to Chile. You know that to go from Uruguay to Chile, you have to fly over Argentina, fly over the Andes Mountains, and then descend into Santiago de Chile. And October the 13th, we were flying. We had to spend one night in Mendoza on the Argentine side of the Andes because there was bad weather over the mountains. But the day after, we started to cross the mountains, and the flight was rather okay. The pilot chose to follow a different path of the one they generally had taken. They flew south, then they turned right, and at some moment the flight started to be rather bumpy. We got into a very dense clouds, into severe turbulences. The flight started to be a little hectic, but who really cares? You know, at 21 years, who really thinks that he's going to crash in the Andes Mountains? And the passengers really enjoyed the flight. There was a lot of adrenaline, and but we then fall into two big air pockets. And when we get out of the clouds, we were flying too close to the mountains, no? But again, who cares? But nevertheless, we were flying too close, and suddenly the joy stopped and fear took over. I remember that the engines of the plane were put on full potential. The pilots tried to recover altitude, but it was too late. Suddenly, the unexpected. What it should not happen, but it happened. One of the wings of the plane touched the slope of the mountains. It was ripped off from the fuselage, and the front part of the plane landed over a glacier. The fall was breathtaking, but the soft snow that had fallen over the glacier stopped the plane in its descent. Nevertheless, it was a very difficult situation. There was no screaming, there was no shouting, there was no panic, but there was a big situation of shock and confusion. I cannot remember too many details about how we crashed in the mountain or what we did just before the crash in the mountain. I do have images. I remember, for example, my friend that was close to me in the plane that was dead with his eyeglasses broken and a line of blood coming out of his mouth. But I cannot remember which my seat number was. I cannot remember how scared I was or how scared my friends were. Those memories, I just have them, block them away. But when the plane stopped, it descended. It was buried, semi-buried by the snow. I remember that we got out of the plane and looked at the mountains. We stared at the mountains. It was snowing lightly. We had very low clouds, which would not allow us to see ahead. But we didn't understand what type of strategy we just got into. Many of our friends were dead. Some were very badly injured. Some of them we don't even know where we were. Some were missing. The first that went out of the plane saw one of them coming through the mountain, but he fell into the snow and he was able to come back to the plane. But after those first shocking moments, we started to organize ourselves. The captain of the team, as the captain itself, and because he was also one of the oldest, start to assign responsibilities. The first thing they had to do is to separate those who were alive from those who were dead. He thought that we had to put the dead bodies all together so they could be easily retrieved when we were going to be rescued. And we felt that we should be rescued very soon. Who falls in the Andes is not rescued very soon. But it looked like that we were not going to be rescued that same evening. So we prepared to stay one night in the Andes Mountains. So we got into the plane, into what was going to be our home. We huddled, we crouched inside the plane. We tried to pass that first night the same way we passed 72 nights more, hoping that was going to be the last night in the mountains. Or at least knowing that to get to the end of our ordeal, we had to spend that night more. The fact was that we were 45 passengers on that flight. 18 were dead the first night or the days after. 27 of us remain alive. But we were there, lost in the middle of the mountains, without knowing where we were, without any mountain preparation, without any food, without any clothing. It was freezing. And we had as only shelter the wrecked fuselage of the crashed plane. But we survived that first night. The day after, we started to distribute the clothing that we all had. We started making water. We prepared some seats to sit outside and to take some sun. We smoked. We talked. And we also realized that we were in a very difficult situation. The rescuers, it looks like that were not going to come that soon. So the captain ordered to ration the food that we had. We only had some chocolates, cookies, some wine, and we had to be strong enough to last until we were rescued. We also had a very small portable radio on which we heard the news about our search. We heard, for example, how many people were involved in our search. We heard about the planes that were flying the mountains trying to look and to find where we were. We also realized how little hope people had that we were alive. And we realized that, and they did not know that we were listening to them. But one day we saw a plane flying over us. And we all went out of the plane and shouted at the plane and made signals and waved at the plane. And the plane flipped its wings, so we thought that they had spotted us. It was good news. The next day we were going to be rescued. But the fact is that the other day, early in the morning, we put on the radio and we heard that the search has been postponed, has been cancelled until the next summer. And that was because there was no chance that someone would still be alive after spending 72 days in the mountains. And that was a very heavy blow to many of us. It was a heavy blow to our captain, who had so many hopes that someone would come to rescue us. But for others, it was just a distant news. It was something that was happening in the outside world. We had already got used to living in that hostile environment. But the problem was that we were running out of food. And it was clear now that we were not going to be rescued the next day. So we realized that the only thing that we had on hand to eat was the dead bodies of our friends. So we started talking about it. How were we going to stay alive until we got rescued? How were we going to stay strong enough to get out walking from the mountains? And one day, without too many talking about it, we just went and took one of the bodies of our friends, made a small cut with a broken glass, took some of the loins of his flesh, put it on top of the fuselage, and we all ate. We passed it through, and one by one of my friends, we ate. Some boys needed some rationalization, or has been made some rationalization about that fact. Some said that it was like Holy Communion, as we were all Catholics. Others said that our friends had died in order to allow us to live. Others said that if he died, he would be more than willing that the rest of us would take his body. But the truth is that we all ate because we were weak and we were hungry and we wanted to live. And to some it was harder, but not because it was human flesh. It was harder because it was raw and they had problems to swallow. But after we started eating, we felt that we were getting control of the mountain. And we started doing some expeditions to know where we were, to see if we would find some signal of life, some place, to see if we could find something to eat other than the dead bodies of our friends. And we went on many expeditions. I went on a couple of them. And in another time, 3 of our friends climbed the mountain. They went up, 500, 600 meters high. And they had to spend one night in the open air. The day after, they came back to the plane, absolutely exhausted. But it was proven to us that we could stay one night in the open air. And that, for us, was a very meaningful news. It means that if it was necessary, if we have to walk, we could stay one night in the open air. But we were talking about that. We were starting to think about sending an expedition. We were trying to choose who were going to be the expeditionaries. But one evening, we were resting inside the plane when we had an avalanche. It had been snowing for a few days when suddenly we heard a blast in the distance, a big rumor, and tons of snow fell over the plane. and it also entered into the plane by the rear part that was open to the mountain. I was sleeping in the floor of the plane, and suddenly I was buried by the snow. Luckily, one of my hands was close to my face, and I was able to inflate my lungs and belly with oxygen, and I was able to continue breathing through the snow, because at the beginning the snow was porous, so you can continue to breathe through. But then it freezes and oxygen stops flowing through. And after many attempts to get out, I started to feel very, very tired. And I realized that I was not going to make it. So I started to fall asleep, and I started just as to die in a very great peace. And when I was almost gone, I was really feeling that I was passing away. One of my friends removed the snow that I had over my face, and the oxygen came back into my lungs. And when the oxygen came back into my lungs, it also came back all the will and strength to continue fighting for life. Then I tried to get out again, very strongly. But on top of me, all my friends were running from one side to the other, trying to find out where their friends were. In that running, they covered me with snow again, but this time, with my hand that I had close to my face, I was able to remove the snow, and later someone grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the snow. Those were the worst days that we experienced in the mountain, or which I have recall of that. Because we only had 1 meter open space in the front of the plane, where we stayed all soaked, weakened, tired, trying to sleep, but with fear to sleep because we didn't know if we were going to wake up again. We spent about 3 days in that situation in complete darkness. The evening of the avalanche, 8 more of our friends passed away. One of them was the captain who died in the avalanche. Liliana, the only woman that we still have alive with us. And 2 of the guys that spent the night in the open air up in the mountain. It really was a very heavy toll for us. But then the snow started to melt again. We were able to drill a hole up through the cabins, through the pilot's cabin. Air started to flow back again, and we were able then to drill a hole backwards, and we started to adjust again to that new situation. As time went by, we learned how to live in the mountain. We spent a lot of time talking about food. We were all going to lunch, very successful business related to food when we were going back to Uruguay. We also talk about very silly things, you know. We talk about how we were going to get back and who had money to call their parents and what we were going to tell our parents. Hey, here we are. Don't be afraid. We're going to take the next train back to Uruguay. We're going to go by plane. We prayed a lot. Every evening we would pray the Holy Rosary. It would quieten our hearts and give us the necessary calmness to endure that night. And we didn't think too much about our home. The girl I was going to see in Chile didn't show up to me over there. I dreamt with girls that I've seen at school, but to whom I had not dared to speak before, and to whom I have not dared to speak afterwards. In a way, these ladies don't know that they were with me in the mountains. But we also got adjusted to living and the way we ate. You know, at the beginning we ate with apprehension, very small loins of meat. Towards the end, we ate everything. we were like hungry animals. We would spend most of our time poking around the snow, looking for the leftovers we had left, we didn't dare to take at the beginning. But it was clear that we could not stay there forever, and that we had lost hopes that someone would fly over us and would see us. So it was clear that we had to go walking, that we had to get from there walking. And after the avalanche and with these new circumstances, well, new leadership did emerge, and the different roles were assumed by the different people that we were over there. We called the expeditionaries to the guys that were going to walk. These guys were the most strong and have the stronger determination to walk out of the mountains. And actually what happened is that these people, they were walking around the mountains a long time, We made many expeditions. They went down and searched for the tail. They spent there a week or 10 days. They came back. They went back to the tail. So they really worked and walked the mountain many times. But the group that was in the plain needed different type of leadership. And there was, for example, the cousins, who was a very close knit of cousins, older than the rest of us. They would take the main decisions. They would set the tone of the day. They would decide which corpse we were going to cut. They would look after those who were ill or they were weak, And there were also others, among who I was one of them, who were unarmed, and we worked a lot. We finished cutting the meal. We did tons of water. We would clean the plane before we got into the plane, before getting into to sleep. We really worked very much, and also tried to get a place in the group. It was very important to get a place in the group and to feel that we were also contributing for the objective of the group. The group objective was the walk. We always thought about the walk, on how we were going to walk out of the Andes. But each one of us knew that the important thing was to work for the group, for the walk, and also work for oneself. So we had both those things clear, We have to work for the group and also work for yourself. And that was the best thing that you can do to survive for yourself. But we didn't talk too many complicated things. Many days, nothing happened. We just were there to survive. And it was important that we survived one day at a time, Surviving one day at a time became one of the most important things that we had over there. But since the avalanche, until we were prepared for our big expedition, 3 more of our friends passed away. One of them was one of my closest friends who died one evening in my arms. Another one was one of the guys who was going to be one of the expeditionaries, and he died because of weakening himself out of a gangrene that took over one of his frostbitten legs. But then, on December the 12th, finally 3 of our friends went out for their final walk. And they started climbing the mountain that we had on our back. They had tried to get out walking east, walking to where the valley opened to Argentina. But we have failed. So they decided this time to walk west to where Chile was. But they had to climb the enormous mountain that we had on our back. And that December the 12th, we saw them start their walk, and we saw them climb the mountain for 2 days. The 3rd day, one of them came back with the news that they had arrived to the summit, but instead of encountering the green valleys of Chile, they encountered an enormous range of white mountains, of which they just could not see the end. They thought about coming back to the plane, but instead of coming back to the plane, they decided to continue walking. And they sent the third expeditionary back to the plane, and with the supplies of 3, they started their unbelievable walk across the Andes. With the avalanche, we had lost our radio, but with the thaw, it reappeared. So again, every morning we were able to listen with some difficulties the news on the Uruguayan radios. There were 10 days since our friends had left. We were worried about their fate. We were starting to prepare a new expedition. I wanted to be in that new expedition, although I don't know if I would have been able to walk 1 day or 2 days, and I might have been dead in the first 300 meters. But that day, on December 22nd, we heard on our small radio that our friends Canessa and Parrado had arrived to Chile, and that a rescue team was on their way to look for us. We felt an enormous joy, an enormous emotion. Our friends had done it. We were very proud of us and of our friends. And we prepared for the event. So we put some luggage as a cross so that the helicopters would easily see us. And we combed our hairs, we brushed our teeth, we tried to put different clothes of what we were wearing, and we smoked the last cigarettes that we had, and we prepared to go home. Finally, close to noontime, helicopters show up across the valley. Parrado was on one of them, and he guided the helicopters undoing his unbelievable trail. The helicopters pilots would not understand how Parrado and Canessa had been able to walk across the Andes for 10 days. But the fact is that when one of the helicopters touched the slope of the Andes, of the mountains, I just jumped into it, and with all 3 of my friends, I left the mountain forever. Not forever because I went back, but at least in that time. I would like to show you some pictures that would give you a better idea of what we went through. Again, these pictures are genuine shots or not make-up pictures, and would show you what the type of environment we were living. This is the real plane, the Fokker Fairchild of the Uruguayan Air Force, number 571. That was, half of that was my home for 72 days. It was a rather modern plane for that time. It had crossed the Andes many times. It was not necessarily an unsafe flight, what we were going to have. And this is the plane after the crash. This photo was taken by the rescuers, and this is how the plane looked after we left our home in the mountains. And this is the view of where we were, of the glacier where we were. This photo was taken also after we left the mountains. But this one was taken by ourselves. This was the real view that we had from the plane. You see that we didn't really know where we were, if we really walked in that direction. There was a horrible mountain at the end of the valley. That actually is the Sosneado mountain. Of course, we didn't know its name at that time. And this is how we spent most of the time. You see, sunbathing. We were sewing a big sleeping bag with insulating material that we took out from the tail of the plane. We didn't know how many nights our friends were going to spend in the open air, and this is how how we spend time. I'm the one who is sitting on top of the fuselage. This is also some time over there. You see some fleshless human rest around. We were really like small, hungry animals living in the plane. This is another photo of ourselves over there. You see that we had some friendship going on. We have jokes. We spend some good time. We love each other. We also have a lot of laughing at some times. I don't remember the jokes, but I do remember the laughing. This is another picture of ourselves over there. And when at the end, the weather had improved very much. We also had some warm days over there. This is the last night that a group of us spent in the mountain. I was not there. I had already left the mountain. These 8 guys spent 73 nights in the mountains and not 72. And this is the very well-known picture that was taken by the helicopters when they arrived to rescue us. And this is the memorial that was built by the relatives of our friends who, in honor of those who didn't come back. Well, I want to finish my presentation telling you that in a way we were little more than teenagers when we boarded that plane on October 13th of 1972. And when we got out of the mountain on December the 22nd, we were basically very primitive and rude men. Just 72 days later. Men that had lived an ordeal. Men that didn't talk much. Men that thought simple things. Men that had learned that in order to survive, we just had to live one more day. We all knew that we had to make it as a team, otherwise we would not have made it. The fact is that nobody tried to escape in search of individual survival. And we all worked for the team because we knew it was the best thing that we can do in order to survive as a group and as individuals. For us, being rescued gave us immense happiness. As I said, the objective had been achieved, an objective for which we fought very hard. It was the end of a horrible journey to where we knew that we had to get. So it was not an explosion of joy and emotions. It didn't come as a surprise to us, But for the rest of the world, it was different because we had an airplane crash in the mountains, and 72 days later we were coming back, skinny and rugged, but we were coming back. I met my father at the San Fernando hospital the day after, and he said to me, "Forgive us, Pedro, we thought you dead." And I did not understand what he was saying because I was alive. I was not dead. And in that sense, I think that our story is much more complicated, or it's much more strange for our family and for our friends than for us. Because for them we had died and we just spent 72 days surviving. But our story is much more complicated for the relatives and friends of our friends who did not come back. Because our story reminds them of their children who were sitting in the wrong place the day we crashed in the mountain, or who were sleeping in the wrong place the day of the avalanche. And these guys were not better or worse than ourselves. And in a way, it's very difficult to thank them what they did when they died, allowing us to stay alive. I think that our story is a very human story because it tells you how a group of individuals can gather strength from adversity and group themselves to survive. We really felt that God was with us. He gave us the necessary strength to live, and we make it by ourselves. I'm glad that I've been able to live an ordinary life out on an extraordinary event, which is not that extraordinary to me because I am a normal guy. I just lived a normal life. I thank God for all the opportunities that He has given throughout all my life, but today I live with the happiness and sorrows of everyone else. In that sense, my ordeal is not a guarantee of anything, because the day after, life continued as usual, and I had another mountain to climb. And I even don't know how much this episode changed my life, because that other life I didn't live it. So that sometimes is hard to tell. I had done a good business career, which allowed me to see the world, to grow as a person, to raise a family. But today I live with the pains and happiness of any other normal being. Even I feel that my mountain is still with me, but it is in my backpack. And I can open it when I want. I can share it with you. We can talk about it. And then later I will put it back into my backpack until the next time. In the meanwhile, I just live a normal life. Where I live, people know about my ordeal, but no one asks me anything. But I know that everybody knows about it. I'm very happy that we did it this way, and we are all normal and human beings, normal human beings. And that is basically my message, that any group of human beings in a similar situation, placed in a similar situation and with similar resources, would have done the same and eventually survived and recovered. Because we didn't do anything really weird. We just let our most basic human instinct develop in search of individual and group survival. I'm convinced that any one of you would not have done it differently, because we are all humans and alike. And I think that the human being has such an extraordinary strength that comes from God that allow us to overcome the most significant and horrible mountains. Well, that is basically what I wanted to tell you. Thank you.